Hey, this is Dr. Steve Ranicki with Dr. Ranicki's Creating Wellness Center in Savannah, Georgia. So a patient asked me recently, how long has chiropractic care been around and how did it begin? And it's actually a pretty cool story, so I'd like to take a few minutes to share it with you. Back in 1895, there was this guy in Davenport, Iowa, who wasn't a medical doctor, but he was practicing something referred to as being a magnetic healer, which was this idea or concept that your left hand had one polarity and your right hand had another, and that if you put both hands on either side of an affected body part, that the magnetic forces could somehow help to heal that part of the body. So this magnetic healer, D.D. Palmer was his name, he had a janitor that worked for him, and this janitor was completely deaf, but only in his left ear. He could hear just fine in his right, but was totally deaf in the left. So D.D. Palmer was talking with the janitor and asked him, how did you lose your hearing? The janitor said, well, one day I bent down to pick up a trash can, and when I stood up, I felt a pop in my mid-back, and then I noticed I couldn't hear anything in my left ear anymore. It was completely deaf. So D.D. Palmer says, that's interesting. Something in your back related to hearing. Do you mind if I feel around a little bit? So the janitor said, no, sure, go right ahead, check it out. So he starts feeling around, and he's feeling around his mid-back, his neck, and his lower back, and he keeps coming back to this one spot in his mid-back. He says, do you know you have this big bump sticking out right here? The janitor says, yeah, I know. Ever since I got that pop, I got that big bump sticking out right there. So D.D. Palmer thought about it for a moment. He said, well, you know, if whatever produced this bump caused you to lose your hearing, perhaps if we could reduce the bump, you might get your hearing back. Janitor said, makes sense to me. I'm game. What do you want to do? So D.D. Palmer tells him to lay down on his table, and he puts his hand on that bump, and he shoves as hard as he could. And there's a loud crack and pop, and the janitor jumps up, and D.D. Palmer said, what happened? And he said, I can hear. It's not perfect, but I can hear something out of that ear. So they did the same thing again the next day, and the next day, and the next day, until the bump was totally gone about a week or so later. And by that point, the janitor's hearing had become completely restored. So D.D. Palmer's thinking about this, and he says, okay, so I found a cure for deafness here, and this is going to be really, really powerful and really important. So he puts an ad out in the Quad City Times. That was a newspaper in that area, because Davenport is one of those quad cities where Iowa and Illinois meet. He puts an ad in there and says, I found a cure for deafness. All deaf people, come to my office, and I'm going to be able to cure you. So hundreds of people who are deaf start showing up, and he starts feeling around, and he found bumps in every one of them, but it wasn't always in the same spot. Sometimes it was in their neck, sometimes it was in the mid-back, sometimes it was in the lower back, but wherever he found the bump, he put his hand on that spot, shoved as hard as he could until there was a crack and a pop, and then he told the person, go home. You should be able to get your hearing back. Come back in about a week and let me know what happened. So about a week later, people start showing back up, and some of them are saying, I can hear. I can't believe it. And other people are saying, I still can't hear anything, but I did finally have a normal bowel movement. That constipation I've had for the last 10 years seems to be gone. And other people said, I can't hear anything, but I haven't had a migraine since that happened. And other people said, I have slept for the first time and I can't tell you how long. Everybody reported something was different. It wasn't always hearing, but something changed for every one of them. So D.D. Palmer realized that apparently what I have here is not a cure for deafness, but I definitely have something. So I have to start trying to figure out what this is. So he starts studying the anatomy more and starts realizing that these bumps he's feeling are misaligned bones. And he comes to the conclusion that what's happening here is that he's realigning these bones, and that's somehow taking pressure off the nerve, and that's making it where the body can work normally and correctly again. One thing that's pretty interesting about that is that at this point, medicine didn't really think very much about the brain or the nerves at all. Medicine thought that all the problems came from bad fluids or bad humors. There were 4 key humors. There was blood, phlegm or water, and 2 types of bile. And they thought sick people had these bad humors, and that's where bloodletting came from. And the idea was they had to get the bad blood out, or they had to give you something to induce vomiting to get the bad bile out, or things like that. So they really didn't think very much about the nervous system. But D.D. Palmer said that it was actually the nervous system that controls everything else, and derangements in the nervous system are what he believed to be causing sickness and disease. It was the first time that anybody's ever suggested or proposed that the nervous system was actually the main control system of the body. It was pretty revolutionary, to be honest with you, for that time. And of course, he was dead right about that. So nowadays, with more science and more understanding, we're not looking at it as that it's simply a misalignment of the bone, pinching or putting pressure on the nerve that is the problem, but it was just simply a tool for you. The chiropractic adjustment is just simply a tool for using the nerve endings in the joints of the spine as a type of keyboard for putting input into the CPU of the body. So that by firing the nerve endings and having that travel up to the brain, he created a bit of a change in the firing pattern of the brain, and then from there, the brain was able to reconnect with other body parts, including the ear, and make changes happen. And some people say, that's just not possible. There's no anatomical correlations, but let's take a look at the brainstem. There is a big correlation between what we call extensor muscles, and that's going to be all the muscles of the back, as opposed to your abdominal muscles, which would be flexor muscles, and the part of the brainstem known as a pontomedullary reticular formation. And that is the area where the nerve from the ear comes in. So by changing the firing patterns in the brainstem, the input to the ear was finally able to make it further up into the central nervous system to the auditory cortex and the temporal lobes, and hearing was restored. So there certainly are anatomical correlations there, but it certainly may not seem obvious to the average person. Says there's nothing runs from your ear to your mid-back to your brain. And that's a true statement. But these two different systems do converge in your brainstem. So that's the story of how chiropractic was discovered. Like I said, pretty cool story, I think. And it took some very, very fortunate circumstances for something that has changed so many lives in so many people to come into being. So next September 18th, keep in mind that's Chiropractic's birthday. So again, I'm Dr. Steve Ranicki with Dr. Ranicki's Creating Wellness Center. Love that opportunity to help you out. If there's anything in your health that's not the way it ought to be, let's see what we can do to make that change.